You cancel plans you were looking forward to. Not because something came up, not because you got busy, but because somewhere between saying yes and the moment arriving, something inside you just went quiet. You sit on the edge of your bed, phone in hand, and you cannot make yourself move. You know you should get ready. You know you want to go. But the wanting and the doing feel like they exist on opposite sides of a wall you cannot see and cannot climb. And it is not just plans. It is the email you have been meaning to send for 11 days. It is the conversation you need to have with your partner that keeps not happening. It is the way your brain goes completely blank the moment your boss asks you a direct question in a meeting. And you stand there with your mouth slightly open and nothing behind your eyes. And afterward, you spend the rest of the day wondering what is wrong with you. You have probably called yourself lazy. You have probably wondered if you are depressed. You have probably tried the advice, the productivity hacks, the morning routines, the accountability partners, and maybe some of it worked for a while. But then the blankness came back, the heaviness, the fog, that particular feeling of being present in your body but somehow not home. Here is what nobody told you. That blankness is not a character flaw. It is not depression, although it can look identical to depression from the outside. And it is definitely not laziness. What is happening inside you in those moments is one of the oldest survival mechanisms on the planet. Your nervous system is shutting you down, not because you are broken, but because a very long time ago, shutting down was the thing that kept you alive. And your body never got the message that it can stop. This is the story of the freeze response, the trauma response that almost nobody talks about, that millions of people live inside every single day without knowing it has a name. And understanding it might be the most important thing you ever learn about yourself. We all know about fight or flight. Somebody cuts you off in traffic, your heart races, your hands grip the wheel, and you either lay on the horn or swerve out of the way. That is your sympathetic nervous system doing exactly what evolution designed it to do. Mobilize, move, survive. For decades, that was the whole story science told us about how humans respond to threat. You either fight or you run. 2 options. Pick one. But there has always been a problem with that story, because it cannot explain what happens when you go blank during an argument with someone you love. It cannot explain why a child who is being hurt does not scream or run. It cannot explain why a person in a car accident sometimes reports feeling nothing at all, watching the whole thing happen as if from far away, as if it were happening to someone else. Fight or flight does not have room for the person who just stops. In 1994, a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges introduced a theory that changed everything. He called it Polyvagal theory, and what it revealed is that the human autonomic nervous system does not operate as a simple 2-lane highway. It has 3 lanes, 3 circuits, each one linked to a different era of evolution, a different survival strategy, and a completely different experience of being alive. The newest circuit is the one that makes us human. Porges calls it the ventral vagal complex, and it is unique to mammals. It is mediated by a special branch of the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in your autonomic nervous system, and it runs from your brainstem to your heart, your lungs, your throat, your face. This is the system that allows you to make eye contact and feel something, to hear warmth in someone's voice and relax, to smile and mean it. When this system is running, you feel safe, connected, present. You can think clearly, regulate your emotions, and engage with other people without it costing you everything. Below that sits the sympathetic nervous system, fight or flight, the mobilization engine. When the ventral vagal system cannot resolve a threat through connection, the sympathetic system takes over. Heart rate climbs, adrenaline floods your bloodstream, blood rushes to your muscles. You are ready to move, ready to act, ready to survive through force or speed. And below that, at the very bottom, sits something much older, the dorsal vagal complex. This is the circuit we share with reptiles, with amphibians, with creatures that were swimming in ancient oceans hundreds of millions of years before the first mammal ever drew breath. In safe conditions, this system quietly handles digestion and restoration. Rest and digest. But when it gets recruited for defense, it does something very different. It shuts everything down. Heart rate drops, blood pressure falls, breathing slows to almost nothing. Muscles go limp. The thinking brain goes offline. Consciousness dims. The system floods with natural opioids that create numbness, that dull pain, that make the world feel far away. This is the freeze response. This is the shutdown. And it is not a malfunction. It is the body's last resort when fighting is impossible and running is not an option. Think about it from an evolutionary perspective. A mouse caught in a cat's jaws cannot fight the cat. It cannot outrun the cat. But if it goes completely limp, if its heart rate crashes and it stops moving and it looks dead, there is a small chance the cat will lose interest, will set it down, will look away for just long enough. That death-feigning response has been saving lives for longer than mammals have existed, and it lives inside you right now, wired into your nervous system, ready to activate the moment your body decides that all other options have failed. The key word there is decides, because your body does not wait for your conscious mind to weigh the options. Porges coined a term for this. He calls it neuroception. And neuroception is not a thought. It is not a decision you make. It is your nervous system scanning the environment below the level of your awareness, evaluating signals from inside your body, from the world around you, and from the space between you and other people, and making a call about whether you are safe or in danger before your thinking brain has any say in the matter. This is why the freeze response feels so bewildering from the inside. You know you are safe. You know there is no tiger in the conference room. You know your partner loves you and this argument is not actually life-threatening. But your body does not care what you know. Your body is responding to a pattern it learned a long time ago, and it is executing a program that was written before you had words for anything. Deb Dana, the clinician who brought polyvagal theory into the therapy room, puts it in a way that might change how you think about yourself forever. She says that story follows state. The stories we tell about who we are, about how the world works, about what is possible for us. Those stories do not come from our thoughts. They come from our nervous system state. When your system is in ventral vagal, in safety and connection, the world looks full of possibility and you feel capable of meeting it. When your system drops into dorsal, vagal shutdown, the world looks hopeless, empty, pointless, and you feel like you will never find your way out. The narrative your mind creates is not the cause. It is the effect. Your nervous system writes the first draft, and your mind just adds the punctuation. And this is where it gets more complicated, because there is not just one kind of freezing. There are two, and they feel completely different from the inside, even though they look similar from the outside. The first is what researchers call tonic immobility. Think of the deer in headlights. In this state, both the sympathetic system and the dorsal vagal system are active at the same time. The gas pedal and the brake pedal are both pressed to the floor. The body is charged with energy, flooded with adrenaline, heart pounding, muscles rigid and tense, but it cannot move. There is enormous activation trapped beneath a layer of paralysis. This is the freeze that feels like being electrified and glued to the spot simultaneously. Alert, hyper-alert even, but locked in place. The second is collapsed shutdown. Pure dorsal vagal. The sympathetic system has gone quiet. There is no tension in the body because there is no energy in the body. Muscles go slack. Heart rate drops instead of racing. The person does not feel frozen in place so much as they feel like they have dissolved, gone translucent, stopped existing. This is the flop response, the ragdoll collapse. And it comes with a wave of numbness, courtesy of the body's own opioid system. It is the state that people describe as checking out, going blank, disappearing. The lights are on, but nobody is home. The distinction matters because these two states need different things to heal. But both of them share a common origin. And that origin, for millions of people, goes all the way back to childhood. Your nervous system was not born with a fixed way of responding to the world. It calibrated itself to the environment it grew up in. And if that environment was chronically unsafe, if it was unpredictable or overwhelming or just painfully, consistently empty, your system learned to default to whatever response kept you alive in that specific context. Pat Ogden, the founder of sensoromotor psychotherapy, identifies two distinct developmental pathways to shut down. Children raised in chronically dangerous environments where there is active abuse, volatility, unpredictability, tend to develop hyper-vigilant nervous systems, always scanning, always braced, hair-trigger fight or flight. But children raised in neglectful environments, where the danger is not what happens, but what does not happen, where there is absence instead of assault, those children develop something different. Their systems trend toward increased dorsal vagal tone, decreased heart rate, chronic shutdown, because the environment taught them that there was nothing to respond to and no one who would respond to them. If no one comes when you cry, your nervous system learns that crying is pointless. If no one notices whether you are in the room, your system learns that disappearing is the safest option. If the world gives you nothing to engage with, your system down-regulates to match. The nervous system mirrors its environment with devastating precision. But the most painful developmental trap of all, the one that creates the deepest and most intractable shutdown patterns, occurs when the source of danger is the very person the child depends on for survival. A baby cannot fight its parent. A toddler cannot flee from its caregiver. And when the person who is supposed to be the safe haven, the one that evolution literally designed to be the solution to the child's distress, when that person becomes the source of the distress, two biological systems collide head-on. The attachment system screams go toward them. They will make it better. The defense system screams, "Get away." They are the danger. And the child is caught between two contradictory survival imperatives with absolutely no resolution available. Mary Main and Eric Hesse, two of the most important attachment researchers in history, gave this impossible situation a name. They called it fright without solution. And what they found is that children caught in this bind develop what is classified as disorganized attachment. These children behave in ways that seem to make no sense from the outside. They approach the caregiver with their head turned away. They freeze mid-movement. They start toward the parent and then stop. As if an invisible wall appeared, they display what Main and Solomon described as sequences of behavior that seem to lack a readily observable intention or explanation. But the explanation is there. The child's nervous system is trying to solve an unsolvable problem, move towards safety and move away from danger at the same time, when safety and danger are the same person. And the only resolution the nervous system can find is to shut down entirely, to collapse the contradiction by collapsing the self. A meta-analysis found that infants whose parents displayed frightened, frightening, or dissociative behavior were nearly 4 times more likely to be classified as disorganized. And as these children grow into adults, the pattern does not disappear. It goes underground. It becomes the template for how their nervous system responds to intimacy, to conflict, to vulnerability, to anyone getting close enough to matter. Bessel van der Kolk, whose book The Body Keeps the Score brought trauma into mainstream awareness, describes what happens to children who grow up without adequate attunement. He writes that when a mother cannot meet her baby's impulses and needs, the baby learns to become the mother's idea of what the baby is. Children who lack physical attunement are vulnerable to shutting down the direct feedback from their bodies, the seat of pleasure, purpose, and direction. The child does not just lose connection to the caregiver, the child loses connection to themselves. And then there is neglect, the quiet devastation. Gabor Mate captures it precisely when he says that children can be wounded not only by bad things happening, but by good things not happening. Their emotional needs for attunement not being met. Neglect does not leave bruises. It does not create dramatic stories you can tell in therapy. It just leaves a hollow space where something essential was supposed to grow, and a nervous system that learned to organize itself around absence. Dan Siegel gave us the framework for understanding how all of this shapes adult functioning. He calls it the window of tolerance, and it refers to the optimal zone of arousal within which a person can think clearly, feel emotions without being swallowed by them, make decisions, and connect with others. Everyone has a window. Above it is hyperarousal, panic, rage, the feeling of being overwhelmed. Below it is hypoarousal, numbness, blankness, shutdown, the feeling of not being there at all. Childhood adversity narrows this window, sometimes to a sliver. The landmark ACE study, involving over 17,000 participants, demonstrated that cumulative childhood adversity creates graded dose-response relationships with adult health outcomes. People with 4 or more adverse childhood experiences were more than 3 times as likely to develop depression. The compounded stress physically alters the brain. The amygdala becomes hyper-reactive. The hippocampus, which is responsible for memory formation and contextualizing experience, actually shrinks. The prefrontal cortex, which should be regulating everything, becomes under-resourced. And these are not just psychological consequences. They live in the body. Robert Scar, a neurologist who spent decades studying the intersection of trauma and chronic illness, developed what he calls the freeze disease model. His core argument is that when the freeze response becomes chronic, when the body remains stuck in dorsal vagal shutdown without discharging the trapped survival energy, the prolonged physiological dysregulation begins to damage organ systems. The immune system, which depends on proper autonomic regulation to function, becomes confused. It starts attacking the body's own tissues, or it becomes suppressed, leaving the person vulnerable to infection and illness. Skyer found patterns so consistent they were difficult to ignore. Patients with fibromyalgia, a condition characterized by widespread chronic pain, fatigue, and cognitive dysfunction that doctors call fibrofog, often had histories of unresolved trauma and presented with nervous systems locked in freeze. Patients with chronic fatigue syndrome, who experience crushing exhaustion that rest does not relieve, frequently showed the flat heart rate variability and low autonomic arousal characteristic of dorsal vagal dominance. Patients with irritable bowel syndrome, who suffer from unpredictable digestive crises, were experiencing exactly what you would expect when the branch of the vagus nerve that governs digestion is caught between activation and shutdown. The pattern extends further. Chronic pain conditions that cannot be explained by structural damage. Autoimmune disorders that seem to come from nowhere. Migraines. Mysterious sensitivities. The medical system calls these functional disorders, which is polite language for, "We can see that you are suffering, but we cannot find anything wrong." And for many of these patients, nothing is structurally wrong. What is wrong is regulatory. Their autonomic nervous system is stuck in a defensive mode that was never meant to be permanent. And the body is paying the price for a war that ended years ago, but was never officially declared over. If you have been to doctor after doctor, and nobody can tell you why you feel the way you feel, this might be worth sitting with. For someone whose window has been narrowed by years of early adversity, even small stresses can push them below the floor. A slightly tense email from a coworker, an unexpected change in plans, a partner's tone of voice shifting by half a degree. Things that would barely register for someone with a wide window become, for this person's nervous system, signals that the world is not safe. And down they go, into the fog, the blankness, the heaviness they know so well and have never been able to explain. Pete Walker, the therapist who wrote Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, mapped the freeze response as one of 4 trauma adaptations: fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. His description of the freeze type is one of the most clinically precise portraits of chronic shutdown ever written. And if you recognize yourself in it, that recognition alone might be worth everything. Walker writes that many freeze types unconsciously believe that people and danger are synonymous, and that safety lies in solitude. He calls the freeze response the camouflage response, because it triggers the individual into hiding, isolating, and avoiding human contact as much as possible. He identifies the freeze type as usually the most profoundly abandoned child, the lost child, who is forced to habituate to the freeze response because the other options were never available. They could not successfully fight back against the adults in their lives. They could not run away, and they did not develop the fawn response of people-pleasing and caretaking. So the only thing left was to disappear. Walker describes the behavioral profile that will sound painfully familiar to millions of people. Freeze types seek refuge in prolonged sleep, daydreaming, wishing, and activities that change the internal channel whenever inner experience becomes uncomfortable. Television, scrolling, video games, anything that provides a low-stakes simulation of engagement without requiring actual presence. They master the art of being somewhere else without ever leaving the room. And here is the part that might sting a little. Walker notes that people raised with good enough parenting arrive in adulthood with flexible access to all four responses. They can fight when fighting is appropriate. They can flee when leaving is the right call. They can freeze momentarily when they need to assess a situation. They can even fawn strategically in certain social contexts. The responses are tools available as needed, but people who are repetitively traumatized do not have that flexibility. They learn to survive by over-relying on one or two of the four responses, becoming fixated in a defensive stance that was once adaptive but now imprisons them. If you are a freeze type, you did not choose this. Your nervous system chose it for you at an age when you had no say in the matter, because it was the best option available in an impossible situation. And it worked. You survived. But the strategy that saved the child is now suffocating the adult. And one of the cruelest tricks of chronic shutdown is how effectively it disguises itself as personality. You do not walk around thinking, I am in a dorsal vagal state. You walk around thinking, I am just a quiet person. I am an introvert. I am low energy. I am not really a people person. do not have strong opinions. I am easygoing. The shutdown has been running so long that you have built an entire identity around it. You have mistaken the walls of your cage for the walls of your house. This is what makes chronic freeze so different from the other trauma responses. The person in a fight response knows something is wrong because they keep losing their temper and alienating people. The person in a flight response knows something is wrong because they cannot stop running, cannot stop working, cannot sit still. The person in a fawn response knows something is wrong because they keep losing themselves in other people's needs. But the person in a freeze response often does not know anything is wrong at all. They just think they are the kind of person who does not have much energy, who does not get excited about things, who prefers to be alone, who watches life more than they participate in it. The absence becomes invisible because it is all they have ever known. You cannot miss what you never had access to. And so the freeze type moves through the world in a kind of muted grayscale, not suffering dramatically, not in acute pain, just quietly absent from their own life, watching from behind the glass, wondering occasionally why other people seem to want things so much, feel things so strongly, move through the world with a kind of aliveness that feels foreign and slightly exhausting to observe. Richard Schwartz, the creator of internal family systems therapy, would frame this differently. He would say that the shutdown is not you. It is a protector part of you, a part that learned to manage overwhelming experience by turning down the volume on everything. And underneath that protector, underneath the numbness and the fog and the blankness, there is a self that is still intact, still curious, still capable of feeling, but the protector will not let you access it until the protector believes it is safe to do so. The therapeutic work is not to overpower the protector or shame it into submission. It is to earn its trust. So how does this show up in the life you are living right now? Let me make this concrete. You are in a relationship with someone you love, and one evening they bring up something that bothers them. Maybe it is about the dishes, or how you have been distant lately, or something you said 3 weeks ago that landed wrong. And from their perspective, it is a small conversation, a bid for connection, a request to be heard. But the moment their voice shifts, the moment you detect that edge of frustration or hurt, something inside you leaves the building. Your face goes blank. Your responses become monosyllabic. Yes. No. Okay. Fine. You are physically present, but emotionally, you have gone to another zip code. Your partner is talking, and you can see their mouth moving, but the words are not landing anywhere. It is like someone turned the volume down on reality. From the outside, this looks like indifference, like you do not care, like you are punishing them with silence. John Gottman, the relationship researcher, identified this pattern as stonewalling and called it one of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse for marriages. His data found that roughly 85% of stonewallers in heterosexual relationships are men. Not because men care less about their relationships, but because men tend to become physiologically flooded faster during conflict. When heart rate exceeds 100 beats per minute, rational thought becomes neurologically impossible. But through a polyvagal lens, what is happening is not a communication strategy. It is a nervous system collapse. The person who shuts down during an argument is not making a choice. They are being pulled below the floor of their window of tolerance into a state where the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that handles language and logic and empathy, has literally gone offline. They could not respond even if they desperately wanted to, and most of them desperately want to. Inside the shutdown, the experience is not cold indifference. It is shame. Shame that they cannot handle this. Fear that if they speak, things will get worse. And a genuine physical sensation of paralysis, as if they are moving through concrete or trapped underwater and cannot reach the surface. One therapist describes clients who say their body feels frozen, that movement feels impossible, and that this is not laziness or indifference, but a genuine nervous system response. And the partner on the other side of that wall has their own experience, which is often abandonment. They are reaching out, trying to connect, and being met with nothing. And nothing is one of the hardest things a human being can receive from someone they love. The partner starts to fill the silence with their own stories. He does not care. She is punishing me. They checked out of this relationship a long time ago. Both people are suffering. Both people are telling themselves stories that are shaped by their nervous system states. And neither one of them is seeing what is actually happening, which is that a threat detector calibrated in childhood is hijacking an adult conversation about who forgot to buy milk. This dynamic becomes a feedback loop that can destroy relationships if neither person understands what is driving it. The pursuing partner escalates because the withdrawal feels like rejection. The withdrawing partner shuts down harder because the escalation feels like danger. Gottman found that this pursue-withdraw cycle, left unchecked, predicts relationship dissolution with alarming accuracy. But when both partners can recognize the autonomic pattern underneath the behavior, when the shutting down partner can say, "I am not choosing to leave, my system is pulling me under," and the other partner can say, "I see that, and I am not going to chase you into the corner," something remarkable can happen. The pattern can interrupt itself, not through willpower, but through mutual recognition of what the nervous system is doing. This is co-regulation in action within a relationship, and it requires something profoundly difficult from both people. The person who shuts down must be willing to name the shutdown as it is happening, even when every instinct says to hide it, and the person on the other side must be willing to slow down, soften, and not interpret the shutdown as a personal rejection, even when it feels exactly like one. Neither of these things is easy. Both of them are possible. And then, after the conversation ends or fizzles out, the shame deepens, because now they feel guilty for disappearing, for not being able to show up, for leaving their partner alone in a moment that was supposed to bring them closer. The shutdown produces shame, and the shame deepens the shutdown, and the deeper shutdown produces more shame, and the cycle tightens like a knot that cannot be untied from the inside. But shutdown does not only haunt relationships, it infiltrates work in ways that are routinely misdiagnosed as something else entirely. You are in a meeting. Your manager asks you a direct question, and your mind, which was tracking the conversation just fine 2 seconds ago, goes completely white, blank, empty. You can feel everyone looking at you. You open your mouth and nothing comes out. Or something comes out. But it is scattered and incoherent, and not at all what you were thinking before the spotlight hit you. Afterward, you replay it for hours. Why could you not just answer the question? You knew the material. You had thoughts about it. But the moment attention focused on you, the moment there was a subtle whiff of evaluation or judgment, your system dropped into dorsal vagal and your prefrontal cortex powered down like someone pulled the plug. And it is not just meetings. It is the email from a senior leader with the subject line, "Quick question," that sends your heart rate into your shoes before you even open it. It is the notification that someone left feedback on your work, and your body responds as though you are about to be publicly executed rather than receiving a few track changes on a document. It is the way you volunteer for nothing, raise your hand for nothing, make yourself as small and invisible as possible in every professional setting, because visibility has always meant vulnerability, and vulnerability has always meant pain. Some people compensate by becoming quietly excellent. They do extraordinary work, but only in the shadows. They become the person everyone relies on, but nobody really sees, and they tell themselves they prefer it that way, that they do not need recognition, that they are just humble. But underneath the humility is a nervous system that learned, probably before age 5, that being noticed was the prelude to something going wrong. The excellence is real. The preference for invisibility is a survival strategy, wearing the costume of a personality trait. High-achieving adults often misinterpret this as laziness, lack of motivation, or burnout. Clinically, however, it reflects a protective nervous system response, not a failure of willpower. For people with trauma histories, authority-related triggers like performance reviews, unexpected criticism from a superior, or being put on the spot do not register as normal workplace stress. They echo past experiences where being visible was dangerous and being evaluated meant something could go badly wrong. The nervous system responds to the echo, not the present reality. It does not know the difference between your third-grade teacher who humiliated you for getting an answer wrong and your current manager who just wants an update on the project timeline. And then there is the thing you have probably been calling procrastination. You have a task. It is not even a hard task. Reply to an email, make a phone call, fill out a form, and you sit there staring at it, and you cannot make yourself do it. Not will not, cannot. There is a weight in your body, a heaviness, a kind of gravitational pull toward the couch, toward sleep, toward anything that is not the thing in front of you. And the longer you sit there not doing it, the worse you feel. And the worse you feel, the less capable you become of doing it. Britt Frank, a therapist and author who studies the neuroscience of being stuck, reframes this completely. She says that procrastination is not solely a mindset process. It is first and foremost a physiological process. Procrastination is what happens when your brain perceives a real or imagined threat. She identifies the freeze version of procrastination as distinct from the anxious, restless kind. If your parasympathetic nervous system perceives danger, you might feel exhaustion, muscle fatigue, a sense of being glued to your screen, locked on your couch, sluggish and forgetful, a sense of heaviness or dread. Tim Fletcher, a complex trauma specialist, traces the mechanism back to its origin. When a child grows up in an environment marked by volatility, criticism, neglect, or conditional love, their developing brain and nervous system learn to associate action with danger, and the brain makes what he calls a brilliant, life-preserving calculation. The safest choice is often no choice at all. To avoid the potential of a painful consequence, it learns to freeze. Executive dysfunction, the inability to plan, organize, initiate, or follow through, is increasingly understood as a trauma response rather than a character deficiency. When the nervous system is stuck in survival mode, the prefrontal cortex that manages executive function is chronically under-resourced. Even tasks that seem small can feel overwhelming. Your brain might prioritize conserving energy because it perceives constant danger. And this is not laziness. This is your body saying it cannot afford to take risks when it is trying to survive. But Frank adds something important. She says that awareness of procrastination as a function of your nervous system does not excuse inertia. It explains it. Explanation is not a synonym for excuse. Understanding why you shut down is not permission to stay shut down forever. It is the first step toward finding a different way. And the shutdown pattern runs deeper than behavior. It shapes how you experience yourself. Dissociation, which is the clinical term for the disconnection from present experience that accompanies dorsal vagal shutdown, exists on a spectrum that most people do not realize they are on. At one end are experiences that are completely normal and universal. Daydreaming during a lecture, highway hypnosis, where you arrive somewhere and realize you have no memory of the last 20 minutes of driving, getting absorbed in a movie and losing track of time. These are garden variety dissociations, and they happen to everyone. In the middle of the spectrum, things get more disruptive. Frequent spacing out during conversations, even when you are trying to pay attention. The person across from you is talking, and you can see them, you can hear the sound, but the meaning of the words is not registering. It is like listening to a language you used to speak but have forgotten. Emotional numbing, where you cannot access feelings in either direction, positive or negative. Someone tells you wonderful news and you know you should feel happy, but the happiness is like a color on the other side of frosted glass. Depersonalization, where you feel detached from your own body, like you are watching yourself from the outside, operating yourself by remote control. You look at your hands and they do not feel like yours. You hear your own voice and it sounds like it belongs to someone else. And derealization, where the external world starts to feel unreal, dreamlike, two-dimensional, as if there is a pane of glass between you and everything else, and nothing out there is quite solid. And at the far end sit clinical dissociative disorders. But the common thread across the entire spectrum is that every form of dissociation serves a protective function. During a traumatic experience, dissociation helps a person tolerate what might otherwise be too difficult to bear. The problem is that protection that was supposed to be temporary becomes permanent. The shield that once saved you from unbearable pain now prevents you from fully living. You might recognize yourself somewhere on that spectrum. You might realize that the fog, the blankness, the sense of watching your life from behind glass is not some mysterious personal failing. It is your nervous system still running a protection program that was installed a very long time ago. And here is one of the most important distinctions this entire conversation has to make. Shutdown and depression are not the same thing, even though they can look almost identical from the outside. Both involve fatigue, both involve withdrawal, both involve loss of motivation and difficulty feeling pleasure. But the felt experience differs in a way that matters enormously for treatment. In depression, the prevailing feeling is often active sadness, guilt, worthlessness, a heavy emotional pain that sits on your chest. In dorsal vagal shutdown, the prevailing feeling is often blankness, absence, not bad so much as nothing. You do not feel sad. You do not feel anything. Emma McAdam, a therapist who runs the channel Therapy in a Nutshell, takes a position that a lot of clinicians are quietly arriving at. She believes that many forms of depression are actually a chronic dorsal vagal state. The two conditions can coexist, and shutdown may be misdiagnosed as treatment-resistant depression when the underlying mechanism is autonomic dysregulation. The distinction matters because antidepressants may address neurochemical depression, but they will not rewire a chronically defensive nervous system. If you have tried medication and it helped with the sadness, but not the blankness, if you have tried therapy and you can articulate your patterns beautifully, but nothing actually changes, this might be why. You have been treating the story while the state remained untouched. And if you have been trying to power through it, to force yourself to act, to use willpower and discipline and motivational quotes to drag yourself out of the fog, you need to understand why that approach does not just fail. It actively makes things worse. When someone in dorsal vagal shutdown is told to push through it, to just do the thing, to stop overthinking and take action, here is what is happening neurologically. The attempt to override the shutdown through willpower creates a conflict between the conscious mind, which is trying to mobilize, and the autonomic nervous system, which has decided that mobilization is dangerous. And when the nervous system and the conscious mind are in direct opposition, the nervous system wins. Every time. It is older, faster, and it does not care about your to-do list. But the damage is worse than simple failure, because each time you try to force yourself through a shutdown state and cannot, each time you set an alarm and cannot get up, each time you open the laptop and stare at the blank screen for 45 minutes and then close it, each time you promise yourself that today will be different, and it is not different, you are adding a layer of shame to the original pattern. The shutdown came first. The shame about the shutdown came second. And now, you are not just frozen. You are frozen and convinced that your inability to unfreeze is proof of your fundamental inadequacy as a human being. This is why the self-help industry's standard advice is so damaging for people with trauma-driven shutdown. Discipline equals freedom. Just start. The 5-second rule. These approaches assume a regulated nervous system as the starting condition. They assume that the person who cannot act is choosing not to act, and that a better choice is available to them. For someone whose nervous system is in dorsal vagal collapse, that assumption is neurologically false. You cannot choose your way out of a state that exists below the level of choice. Gabor Mate captures this when he talks about the disconnection from self that trauma creates. The person is not choosing avoidance. They have lost access to the part of themselves that would know what they want, that would feel the impulse to act, that would experience desire and motivation as embodied sensations rather than abstract concepts. Mate describes patients who can tell you what they should want, but cannot feel the wanting. The bridge between knowing and doing has been washed out, and no amount of motivational language will rebuild it. Only the body can do that. Which brings us to the question you are probably asking right now. What do you do about this? How do you come back from a shutdown that has been running for years or decades? And the answer begins with something that sounds almost too simple, but it is the foundation of everything else. The answer begins with understanding that your body, not your mind, has to lead the way out. When someone is in dorsal vagal shutdown, the prefrontal cortex is offline. This is not a metaphor. It is a measurable neurological fact, and this creates a fundamental problem for talk-based therapies that operate primarily through language, logic, and insight. You are essentially trying to reach a part of the brain that has had its power cut. One clinician frames it like trying to reason with a fire alarm. No amount of logical explanation will make it stop when it is detecting smoke. Kolk captured the core principle when he wrote that the body keeps the score. If the memory of trauma is encoded in the viscera, in gut-wrenching emotions, in autoimmune disorders and musculoskeletal problems, and if it is reenacted in interpersonal relationships, then it stands to reason that the healing of trauma needs to take place in the body as well. His insight that trauma victims cannot recover until they become familiar with and befriend the sensations in their bodies has reshaped the entire field. You may realize that your fear of intimacy has something to do with your mother's postpartum depression, he writes, but that alone is unlikely to open you to happy, trusting engagement with others. Insight without somatic experience is like reading the menu without eating the meal. The reason body-based approaches have a neurological advantage here is anatomical. The vagus nerve, which is the primary communication highway between body and brain, is approximately 80% sensory fibers, traveling upward from body to brain, with only 20% motor fibers traveling downward from brain to body. The body has far more to tell the brain than the brain can command the body. Working bottom up, changing the body's physiological state first and letting that signal safety upward, has a 4-to-1 transmission advantage over trying to think your way into a different nervous system state. Peter Levine, the psychologist who developed somatic experiencing, arrived at the foundational insight of his career by watching animals. He describes a cheetah bringing down an impala at 65 miles per hour. The impala goes limp, appears dead. But if the cheetah is distracted and the impala gets a chance, something remarkable happens. The animal begins to tremble. Its legs shake, its body quakes, and then it springs up and runs away. All of that survival energy that got locked in by the freeze gets discharged through involuntary trembling, and the animal returns to normal as if nothing happened. Even more revealing is an observation from an African wildlife manager who told Levine that when they capture animals for relocation and the animals do not shake and tremble after being released, they do not survive. The discharge process, the involuntary trembling and shaking that releases the trapped survival energy, is not a side effect of recovery. It is recovery. Levine's core argument is that humans suffer because we are unable to discharge the energy that is locked in by the freezing response. The traumatized veteran, the assault survivor, the abused child, all have been confronted by overwhelming situations. If they are unable to orient and choose between fight or flight, they will freeze or collapse. Those who are able to discharge that energy will be restored, rather than moving through the freezing response as animals do routinely. Humans often begin a downward spiral, characterized by an increasingly debilitating constellation of symptoms. Why do we not discharge naturally the way animals do? Social conditioning. We are taught from a very young age to suppress exactly the responses that would complete the cycle. Calm down, hold it together, stop shaking, be strong, keep it together. Every one of those instructions, delivered with the best of intentions, teaches the nervous system to override its own healing process. And it starts early. A child falls off a bicycle and begins to cry and tremble, and the parent rushes over and says, "You are okay. You are fine. Stop crying." The parent means well. The parent is trying to reassure. But what the child's nervous system hears is that this discharge, this trembling and crying that was about to release the shock energy, is not acceptable, is not allowed, must be suppressed. The child swallows the activation and does it again the next time, and again, until suppression becomes automatic, until the body no longer even attempts to discharge because it has learned that discharge will be met with disapproval rather than support. By the time we are adults, most of us have become so proficient at suppressing these natural discharge responses that we do not even notice we are doing it. We sit in a car after a near-miss accident and our hands are shaking, and we grip the steering wheel harder to make them stop. We get devastating news and our body wants to wail, and we take a deep breath and compose ourselves. We emerge from a confrontation and our legs are trembling, and we lock our knees and walk normally. every single time we interrupt the process that would have completed the cycle, and the energy stays locked inside. Levine's therapeutic method, Somatic Experiencing, uses two core principles. The first is titration, which means processing trauma in small, manageable doses rather than all at once, because trauma was too much, too fast, too soon. The renegotiation of that experience must be slow, gentle, and carefully paced. You do not rip the lid off everything at once. You open it a crack, let a little out, close it, let the system settle, and open it again. The second principle is pendulation, which is the natural rhythm between contraction and expansion. The therapist guides the person to oscillate between sensations of discomfort and sensations of safety, gradually building the nervous system's capacity to tolerate activation without shutting down. Over time, something begins to happen. Micro movements appear, small twitches in the arms, the legs, the core, the body beginning to run its motor plan for the escape that was interrupted years or decades ago. As awareness is drawn to these movements, they tend to grow, and the person is encouraged to let the body gently and slowly follow what the nervous system is trying to do rather than override it. In doing so, the motor plan is able to complete, and that stuck loop is permanently resolved. Pat Ogden's sensorimotor. Psychotherapy works along similar lines, but integrates the body even more directly into the therapeutic conversation. Ogden observed that traumatized people often have truncated physical movements, gestures that start and stop, impulses that get caught halfway through, an arm that begins to rise in a protective gesture and then freezes, a torso that starts to turn away and then locks. Her approach involves tracking these somatic narratives in real time during therapy, noticing where the body gets stuck and gently supporting the completion of interrupted defensive movements. When a person who froze during an assault is able, in the safety of a therapeutic relationship, to complete the push-away motion their body tried to make 20 years ago, something shifts at a level that language cannot reach. The body learns that the movement is possible now, that it is allowed, that the danger has passed. Van der Kolk's research has also demonstrated the power of practices like yoga for trauma recovery. In a controlled study, he and his colleagues found that a 20-week yoga program was more effective than any drug treatment that has ever been studied for PTSD. The mechanism is not mystical. Yoga works because it asks the person to notice what they are feeling in their body without trying to change it, to hold a posture that creates mild discomfort and breathe through it rather than dissociating from it, to experience activation and discover that they can tolerate it. Each time the body registers discomfort and does not shut down, the window of tolerance widens by a fraction. Over weeks and months, those fractions add up. The principle underneath all of these approaches is the same. You cannot think your way out of a body-based pattern. You have to give the body a new experience, and that experience has to happen slowly enough that the system can process it, safely enough that the defense mechanisms do not kick back in, and repeatedly enough that the new pattern becomes stronger than the old one. Deb Dana, working from the Polyvagal framework, introduced a concept that has quietly become one of the most useful tools in trauma recovery. She calls them glimmers. Glimmers are micro moments of ventral vagal activation, small instances when the nervous system registers safety or connection. They are the opposite of triggers. They are not big, dramatic experiences of joy or breakthrough. Dana describes them as tiny, fleeting. You feel something shift inside you, a warmth, an ease, a sense of okay, and then it passes. But your brain marks it. A glimmer might be the feeling of sunlight on your face, the sound of a particular song, the weight of a warm cup in your hands, the way a dog looks at you when you walk in the door. They are everywhere, all the time. But a nervous system biased toward threat detection has been trained to ignore them. The therapeutic power lies not in any single glimmer, but in the accumulation. Bringing attention to these small moments moves the system toward a tipping point, and multiple micro moments may become significant enough to create an autonomic shift. Each noticed glimmer strengthens the neural pathway associated with safety. Dana's clinical framework rests on what she calls the 4 R's. Recognize the autonomic state you are in. Respect the adaptive survival response, meaning acknowledge that your system is doing what it learned to do, and it had good reason to learn it. Regulate or co-regulate into ventral vagal, and then re-story, because when the physiological state changes, the narrative changes. You do not fix the story to fix the state. You shift the state, and the story rewrites itself. And this brings us to co-regulation, which polyvagal theory reveals is not a luxury or a nice to have. It is a biological requirement. Dana states that polyvagal theory shows us that co-regulation is a requirement for feeling safe, and that our physiology is regulated in connection to one another. The mechanism is ventral vagal. When you encounter someone whose voice is warm, whose facial expressions are open and calm, whose body language is relaxed, your ventral vagal system tunes in and begins to mirror that regulation. Your nervous system borrows their calm. And most of the time, this happens without any words at all. Nervous systems are communicating beneath the level of language. This is why the therapeutic relationship itself is a healing instrument. When a therapist is regulated, when they are grounded and present and safe, the client's dysregulated nervous system can use that regulation as a template, a reference point, a demonstration that calm is possible. And this is also why isolation, the freeze type's default strategy, is both the symptom and the trap. The very thing that would help most human connection is the thing that feels most dangerous. The medicine tastes exactly like the poison. Van der Kolk puts it simply: being able to feel safe with other people is probably the single most important aspect of mental health. Safe connections are fundamental to meaningful and satisfying lives. Now here is the part that might be the most counterintuitive and important thing in this entire conversation. The path out of shutdown does not lead directly to peace. It leads through fire first, because the autonomic hierarchy is sequential. A person cannot jump from dorsal vagal collapse straight to ventral vagal safety. They have to pass through the sympathetic nervous system. On the way up, they have to move through the territory of fight and flight to get back to connection. And what this means practically is that as someone begins to emerge from chronic shutdown, they often experience something that feels like the opposite of healing: agitation, restlessness, trembling, heat, and most notably, anger. Underneath the freeze response is almost always a fight or flight energy that was thwarted, a defensive impulse that could not be expressed because the child could not fight back and could not get away. As shutdown begins to lift, that buried mobilization energy surfaces. The person might feel the sudden urge to push away, to shout, to run, to clench their fists, to say no in a voice they have never used before. And this terrifies people. After years of numbness, the sudden flood of anger or agitation feels like proof that something has gone wrong, like they are getting worse, not better. But Dana's Polyvagal ladder explains why this is predictable and necessary. You can only move up the ladder one rung at a time. Feeling angry means the system has left collapse. Feeling agitated means the system is mobilized. These are stations on the way back to connection, not signs of regression. The road out of shutdown passes through the territory of feeling everything you were not allowed to feel when the shutdown was installed. The therapeutic task in those moments is to help the person tolerate this activation without either suppressing it back down into shutdown or acting it out in destructive ways, to let the energy move through the body without either bottling it or detonating it. This is why body-based therapies are so essential in this work. They provide a container for the energy to move, and the scientific basis for hope in all of this rests on neuroplasticity, the brain's lifelong capacity to reorganize itself in response to experience. This is not limited to childhood. Modern neuroscience confirms that the brain continues to form new neural connections throughout the entire lifespan. Every new experience forms a pathway. Repetition strengthens it. Trauma can be understood as maladaptive neuroplasticity. The brain reorganized itself around threat detection and defensive responses because that was what the environment demanded. Recovery uses the same mechanism in reverse. Small changes, repeated frequently, can gradually rewire the system, creating new pathways associated with safety and connection that slowly compete with and eventually override the older defensive circuits. Research shows that regular mindfulness practice reduces hyperactivity in the amygdala, strengthens the prefrontal cortex, and creates new connections between the regulatory brain structures that stabilize arousal. Recovery is not linear. Nobody goes from chronic shutdown to permanently regulated in a straight line. People cycle through states. The window of tolerance is dynamic. It expands through consistent practice and therapeutic work, but it also contracts under stress and fatigue and illness and grief. Dana normalizes this when she says we are meant to fluctuate between our regulatory and emotional states. The goal is not to never experience shutdown again. That would be like trying to never feel fear. The goal is to spend progressively more time in the ventral vagal state of safety and connection, and to develop the capacity to return there more quickly after being pulled into defense, to shorten the visits to the bottom of the ladder rather than eliminating them entirely. And this is where honesty requires something of us. Because the truth about healing from chronic shutdown is that it is not fast and it is not easy. There is no 5-step protocol. There is no morning routine that will fix a nervous system that has been organizing around danger for 30 years. The people who tell you otherwise are selling something. The body learns slowly. It learns through experience, not explanation. It learns through repeated moments of safety, not through a single breakthrough. And it learns best in the context of relationship, which is the hardest part of all for people whose nervous system decided long ago that relationship equals danger. What recovery actually looks like day to day is not dramatic. It looks like noticing that you are holding your breath and choosing to exhale. It looks like feeling the urge to cancel plans and going anyway, not because you forced yourself, but because some small part of you remembered that you felt okay the last time you went. It looks like sitting in a therapy session and noticing that your hands are cold and your chest feels hollow, and being able to say that out loud instead of performing normalcy. It looks like the moment when your partner raises their voice and instead of going blank, you feel a flash of something, anger or hurt or frustration, and that flash, however uncomfortable, is a sign that your system is no longer dropping straight to the bottom. Recovery looks like longer stretches of time in the ventral vagal window. Not permanent residence there, just longer visits and shorter trips to the basement, and the growing ability to notice when the elevator is going down, which is itself a form of regulation that was not available before. Gay Hendricks, in his work on the upper limit problem, describes an internal thermostat for how much happiness and aliveness a person allows themselves to experience. Exceed the setting, and the system triggers self-sabotage to bring you back to the familiar baseline. For people with chronic shutdown, the baseline is set very low. A good day, a moment of genuine connection, a flash of excitement about the future, these can actually trigger a shutdown response because the nervous system does not have a category for sustained positive experience. It reads unfamiliar as unsafe. And so the person unconsciously creates the conditions for the fog to return. Not because they want to suffer, but because suffering is the known quantity and the nervous system always prefers the devil it knows. Healing involves slowly, carefully raising that thermostat, tolerating a little more joy, a little more connection, a little more aliveness. And when the system pulls you back down, as it will, meeting that pullback, not with frustration, but with the recognition that this is exactly what a healing nervous system does. It tests, it retreats, it inches forward, it retreats again, and gradually, so gradually that you might not notice it happening, the forward inches become longer than the backward ones. But here is what is also true. Dana offers the framing that holds the whole thing together. She says that no matter how the nervous system has been shaped, the capacity for moving out of protection and returning to connection is built into our biology. The ventral vagal system does not get destroyed by trauma. It gets buried, suppressed, overridden, but it is still there. Every moment of warmth you have ever felt, every flash of connection that surprised you, every time you laughed before you could stop yourself, that was ventral vagal. It did not come from nowhere. It came from a system inside you that is still intact, still waiting, still capable of coming back online. Your nervous system learned shutdown in relationship, and it will unlearn shutdown in relationship. Not all at once, not without setbacks, not without the discomfort of feeling things you have spent a lifetime not feeling. The path is somatic, meaning it goes through the body. It is relational, meaning it requires the presence of another regulated nervous system. And it is gradual, meaning it asks for patience from a person whose nervous system was never taught what patience feels like from the inside. If you recognize yourself in any of this, you need to know something. That blankness you feel is not evidence that something is wrong with you. It is evidence that something happened to you or did not happen to you at a time when you were too small to do anything about it. Your body did what it had to do. And the fact that you are here, reading this, still looking for answers after all the times you told yourself there was no point, that itself is a sign that the part of you that wants to come back to life has not given up, even when the rest of you is convinced it has. The shutdown response is not the end of your story. It is the chapter where your body did the only thing it could to survive. The next chapter is about learning, slowly, in your body, in connection with other people, one glimmer at a time, that survival is no longer enough, that the danger has passed, and that the frozen river inside you can, slowly and on its own schedule, begin to thaw. Your nervous system does not believe that yet, but it can learn, and maybe that is enough to start with.